your permission, Venerable Mahatera and the other members of the Sangha, I'm actually feeling a bit hesitant as to say very much, because I sympathize very much with the people sitting on that hard floor. It must be excruciating for you. But as you are people of great faith, you are sitting very still with great patience. I won't keep you very long, because I think quite enough has been said, in fact, to inspire you, to encourage you, and certainly to bring a peaceful mood into this hall, into this monastery. Because one of the most important effects of the words that are spoken, and not just the intellectual meaning, but the mood that they create to the listener and to the gathering. And words of gentle speech, kindness, with great compassion, always bring a feeling of peace, harmony, a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood, which is so necessary and so much lacking in this world today. However, if I have to say something about the Dhamma and the practice, it is something of great importance to us, because it is the way for us to cultivate greater peace, greater happiness in our lives. And because there are such a variety of people in the world, and we can see such a great variety of people gathered here tonight, and certainly within this city of Kuala Lumpur, all these different people, so just within the Buddhist community, do have different temperaments, different needs, and they approach Buddhism in different ways. To this extent, I'm quite happy to see the great variety of Buddhist centers which are operating at present in Kuala Lumpur and throughout Malaysia. They offer the Buddha Dhamma in slightly different ways, and I think they meet the needs of a variety of people. On one occasion, somebody commented to me after they had visited Thailand, commented on the fact that in Thailand there are very many different types of monasteries and different types of monks, and they felt that that was a weakness of Buddhism in Thailand, because it tended to create confusion. And I certainly acknowledge that the great variety can create confusion. On the other hand, it need not do so. And the great variety may in actual fact be a strength. Because if we only offer one approach, only offer one thing, it may be suitable for a number of people, but not all of the people. Because different people do have different interests, different abilities, different tendencies. So that the variety of Dhamma being offered in Kuala Lumpur, I think, is good. Different people will choose slightly different approaches. And if all of us who are involved in the teaching of the Buddha Dhamma do so sincerely, within whatever form, within whatever tradition that we are proficient, in whatever mode of practice that we have developed, fulfill our obligation of sharing with the lay community with sincerity, I think benefits will arise. If we are proficient in the field of study, and we can teach the theoretical pariyatti Dhamma to help people have a better understanding of the foundation of the Buddhist teachings through study, I think that's a great blessing to the Buddhist community and extremely necessary. If we are in a position to be more socially active and involved in social work, as they call involved Buddhism or something of that nature these days, to be more involved in social matters that are of relevance to the community today, I think that is good too, if it is done with sincerity. If we are of the temperament to be more reclusive and are proficient more in the meditation practice and mainly concerned with the practice of training the mind in concentration, and we can offer something of our experiences to the Buddhist community through teaching I think that will be of great blessing as well to the community. And in this way, we can reach out to so many more people, and so many more people will benefit. And in the end, the hope is that we can all come to completion, to a balanced understanding of the Buddha Dhamma, to a balanced practice of the Buddha Dhamma, and to the balanced realization of the Dhamma. I have discovered this to be very much the case in Australia, where I live at present. Originally, when I lived in Thailand, I lived in a forest monastery, and I was only concerned with being a forest monk, living very simply, concerned primarily with meditation, not involved very much in either the theoretical or the ritual side of Buddhism. So I didn't have to perform so many ceremonies, so many rituals. I considered that to be unnecessary and a distraction, and I didn't want to know anything of it. Because in Thailand we do tend to separate monks, so the study monks, the practice monks, the village monks, the forest monks. And so you just do your own thing and live in your own world. And that is that's quite possible in Thailand, as I said, because there are many centers, many temples, and they all offer different things. When I went to Perth, I had to become a jack of all trades, because I was the only monk living there. And even at present, there's only 5 of us in Western Australia. And the community has grown greatly. And the community is a very diverse community. We have traditional Buddhists from the various Southeast Asian countries with their needs for ritual, for ceremony, which provides emotional gratification, emotional support, and brings them joy. And this is very important, especially for the refugee people who feel a great sense of loss and a great sense of despair. Without this degree of emotional, spiritual support, I think they would be in much worse state than they are at present. Then there are the various intellectual Buddhists who like to listen to Dhamma discussions and have Dhamma discussions, want to contemplate Dhamma. And these people need to have their needs fulfilled as well, so that they can become more interested and eventually begin to practice what they are thinking about. And of course there is also a great number of people interested in meditation, and this I found to be more in line with my own interest and easier to cater to. But after living there for 9 years, I actually see a great advantage in having this variety of people with a variety of interests in Buddhism and the variety of approaches, because they see each other. And I think this is very, very important. To see each other means that we begin to appreciate that there is another side. Buddhism is not just meditation. Some people don't know that. Buddhism is not just paying homage, offering incense and flowers and doing a puja. Buddhism is not just thinking about Dhamma, reading books, learning the various scriptures. Buddhism is all of these things and more, because it relates to every aspect of life. And so I think it is quite good in Kuala Lumpur that you have such a variety. And as I said, it need not be the cause for conflict. Don't let it be the cause for conflict. Develop understanding, develop patience, develop ways of living together so that amongst differences there will be no conflict. The important thing is to develop a peaceful heart. When the heart is peaceful, there will be no conflict. Even though we may disagree, even though we may think differently, even though we may practice differently, but the difference won't be the cause for conflict. Furthermore, through the peaceful heart, we are sensitive. When we are sensitive, we are compassionate. When we are compassionate, we would not do anything to take advantage, to exploit, or to hurt another. And I think this is what I would like to offer you this evening, in the hope that it may be of some use to all of you who've gathered this evening for this puja. Thank you very much.
Remember? Yeah. What the Jagaro?
If the person time is here, what is the alternative thing for the person to do instead of just doing meditation? Because I see most of these cases, when mostly this person is almost going off. These monks or lay devotees tell them to do meditation. But if they haven't got the meditation base, it's hard for them to do. So besides that, what is the best alternative thing for them to do?
So it's like somebody who's very sick and approaching death. Well, it depends on who it is, obviously, as to what you would advise them to do. Because death, it can be quite a frightening experience for most people. So the first thing is to try and encourage a way of coming to terms with death. And death is always near to all of us. I mean, it can come any time to anyone. But generally, when we're healthy and still young, then we don't think about death so much. But when one is sick, so if one has a what they call terminal illness, or one is very old, then of course one starts to think about death because there seems to be a more likelihood of it. And quite often people become quite frightened at the prospect. So now what one would encourage is to, for a start, you don't know when you're going to die. Even if you're very sick, one doesn't know, and one just, best to just take one day at a time and to try and develop an attitude of making the best of that one day that one has. Today is today. One doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Even if one is sick, one doesn't know whether one is going to die. One can also recover. And even if one is old, one doesn't know when one is going to die, because sometimes young people die before old people. So it is still very uncertain. But nevertheless, we do know that eventually everyone is going to die. And yes, we're going to die. So the important thing is to encourage the person to develop a peaceful attitude with that. In other words, to come to terms with this fact, instead of just being afraid and rejecting and avoiding. So normally I would encourage that the person actually contemplates this as a possibility in life, is that I'm going to die. When, I don't know. And to try and accept that, to really accept it in that it's perfectly natural. It's going to happen to everyone. It's just a matter of time. Now, the reason why people are afraid of death is because, first of all, it represents separation. Separation from all that is loved, all that is dear and near, all the things that we attach to. So it's separation from that makes it quite frightening for people, especially for, say, family, separation from one's family. That can be quite terrifying. Leaving behind all that is loved can be quite frightening. The second aspect of the fear is the unknown. One doesn't know what happens at death, where one is going to go, what's going to happen to one. So there is the unknown and the fear of the unknown. And so this makes the person very uneasy and unable to face death or the possibility of death peacefully. So the first thing that I would normally encourage is the person sort of tries to contemplate, to come to terms. If death happens, yes, of course there must be separation. That's just a fact that inevitably we must separate from those that we love, those that we care for, those that love us. Still there must be separation. We can never have constant, permanent relationships, just temporary ones. And in the end, death will separate. So that somehow we must be able to accept that. And in the meantime, make the best of what we've got, the best of the situation. So that while there's life, we can live it and enjoy it, and when death comes, we can accept it as a reality. With regards to the unknown factor of death, which brings so much fear, well, as Buddhists, I think we should have a much better attitude, because we know that birth is not the beginning and death is not the end. We know that death is just a continuation. We know that when this life ends, that there'll only be, it's just like another step, just like another step in the process. We leave one body behind, and as long as there is desire to be, we take up a new body. And in actual fact, sometimes this is a relief, because to be alive in a body that's getting very old, for instance, or in a body that's getting very sick, can be very, very difficult, and a lot of pain, a lot of physical discomfort, a lot of suffering. So that death sometimes is like a relief from all of that. It's like a broken down house is not very nice to live in. So we move on from that house and take on a new house. And we also know that this rebirth is not something that happens accidentally. It's not something that happens just with no laws governing it. We know that the rebirth is dependent on our state of mind and how we live and what we develop in our lives. And when we have been living a good life and we've done a lot of good things, then we can feel reassured. We can find confidence in the knowledge that our rebirth will be a good one. At the very least, our rebirth will be a human birth. At the very least, we'll be reborn as healthy, complete human beings. And because of our long association with the Dhamma, our long association with the religion, then more than likely we will have the opportunity to once again come across the Dhamma and practice it again in our lives to derive the benefits. So that we have confidence in the power of our goodness, the power of our merit. Of course, none of us are all perfect, none of us are all good, none of us are all pure, because we're just human beings. But still, as human beings who've developed goodness, and human beings who've been exposed to goodness, I think every human being, more than likely, everyone who's tried to live a good life, everyone who's tried to follow the path, will be reborn at the very least as a human being. So that we know death is not the end. It's just maybe a new start. Maybe just another start for us. So we find it easier to come to terms with death when it comes. It's not that we seek death, but then we don't fear death. We enjoy our lives and we make the best of our lives as long as we can. Just one day, we live that one day. It's better to live one day with joy and happiness and with peace, rather than to have 100 days or 100 years of just having fear and anxiety. So we live that one day with gratitude, and we enjoy it as best as possible. And we leave the future remain the unknown. We leave it at that, but we don't fear, because we know inevitably everybody must die. We can accept that. We know that inevitably there must be separation, and we can accept that. But while we're together, then we live in a way that brings happiness to us. And when death comes, we know that it's just moving on. It's just moving on to just a new life, a new rebirth. And our rebirth will be a good one. So we feel a great sense of confidence and a great sense of acceptance. And so we can live the rest of our life in a much better way. Now, there is the aspect of meditation, and that is an important thing to encourage as well in people. But first of all, I would encourage this attitude, to encourage the person to try and find a better way to relate or a better way to think about death. As far as meditation, yes, it's very good to do a little bit of meditation. Meditation is just a way of calming the mind as best as one can. But of course, it depends on the situation, depends on the time, depends on one's health, depends on one's responsibilities, so many things. So one may not be able to do a lot of meditation, but just to do a bit is very good. And to do meditation, just learning to calm and tranquilize the mind. Just learning to calm the mind. Just without any big ambition. Just learning to calm and make the mind peaceful. Just learning to keep the mind in a peaceful state as much as possible when meditating, that's all. We can also contemplate, we can bring happy thoughts into the mind, whatever makes the mind feel happy when we think of the goodness of our lives. We can do devotional practice, things that bring a peaceful and happy mind. Anything that brings more happiness into our mind is a good thing to do. And especially towards if one is really dying, in other words, one is close to death, then it's important to try and keep the mind happy and joyful. And this is why it's good to do good things, that such as devotional practices, to be with good friends, to be with things that bring joy into the mind. This is very good. Now, it depends a little bit on the person. You can't make a general rule for everyone. Some people like to be left alone. Some people like to have more support. But this is something that the individual must decide, and also one's friends and relatives must decide. But also to just come to terms with just the fact of life, and somehow to bring the mind into a state that it can accept this fact, and then just put it aside and get on with enjoying the one day that one has, because that's all any of us really have, just the one day. We may as well live this one day. So that's generally what I would encourage the person, rather than just thinking you must meditate, because especially if the body is getting painful or if one's strength is getting less, then it may be difficult to do a lot of meditation. But to use the time and the energy that one has, whatever one can do to make the mind peaceful and calm is good. And so all of these different things are to try and help make the mind peaceful and calm. Our attitude, the way we think, the way we contemplate, and also the way we sort of live and have lived. The intention is to be able to bring the more positive state of mind. If we can meditate, do formal meditation, that's even better. That's very good. Because through meditation, it may be possible, especially if one has been doing it for a long time, it may be possible to bring the mind to quite a peaceful state, which will be good. And also remember that a peaceful mind and a joyful mind is very healing. The body can be healed as well. And not all illnesses can be healed, but some illness can be certainly reduced by just developing a more peaceful and happy mind. And this is the purpose, of course, of our meditation. So that with regards death, these are the sort of things that I mention to people. And life is very uncertain. But the time of death is also very uncertain. Once there was a lady I visited. I was taken to visit this lady because this friend of hers, who used to be my disciple, said that she was very, very, very close to death. The doctors had given her only a few weeks. She was very close to death. So I went to see her. She wasn't a Buddhist, but she had been meditating and knew something about Buddhism. So we were talking, and after talking for a while, she asked me, "Do you think that I'm going to die?" And I looked at her, and she looked very sick, like she had the swollen glands, and she looked very, very sick. And I said, "Well, I don't really know." And she said, "The doctor thinks I'm going to die, and my friends say that I'm going to die." And so I said, "Well, I don't really know. Who knows who's going to die and when they're going to die? Maybe you will die, but maybe you won't. You just don't know. So all you can do is make the mind as peaceful as possible, accept what is happening and try to do the best you can. If you die, well, that's what happens. If you get better, well, that's good." So anyway, after about 2 or 3 weeks, she hadn't died. She was still alive. And then after quite a long time, I saw this man again, and I asked him, "What's happened to so-and-so? She's recovered." So that was quite a turn of events, because everybody expected her to die, and instead she recovered. Now one just never knows. We never know about these things, so it's not good to say, "Yes, you're definitely in such and such a time." No one knows. Not even the doctors know. The better attitude is to just take one day at a time. Live today. Live today as best as you can. Make the mind peaceful by whatever means that you can. Enjoy your day that you have. And know that tomorrow is unknown. Death is inevitable, but when is unknown. When it comes, we know that it's only just another change in our lives, that's all. Just another step. And we know that death is not the end. So that this should be able to make us more peaceful and more accepting of this whole process. So that's what I normally encourage people in that way. It's not a very... I don't usually encourage people to do excessive or very extreme things. If they're just lay people, that's all I would encourage. Well, at the monastery, if somebody requests to go and stay there, usually if they are Buddhist people, or at least very familiar with Buddhism, and they are able to live according to the rules of the monastery, which is basically the 8 precepts, plus a lot of other, it's just custom of our monastery, then they're allowed to go and stay at the monastery. And I just ask that they stay, even if they say they want to ordain, I say, well, just stay for a while, maybe a month, maybe longer, depending, just as guests. No obligations. They can leave when they want, and they can be asked to leave if they don't fit in. After about a month or 2 months, depending on what they'd like, it may, if they're still interested in ordaining, then I would encourage them to formally take the 8 precepts, which means that they shave their hair, wear white, and take the 8 precepts permanent, like on a permanent basis, and take dependence. That is, they become more or less disciples. And if they do this, they have to make a commitment for 1 year, so that then I expect that they will stay on for a year, approximately a year. I also expect that there will be the willingness to train and that they will live by these 8 precepts, and that they will depend on guidance. In other words, they just don't come and go as they want. Then they're training, so they would be under guidance and be willing to follow the teacher in what the teacher is instructing and encouraging. During that 1 year, they just live at the monastery. They join in with the routine like everybody else, the regular meditations. They're just members of the community. We call them anagarika. After 1 year on 8 precepts, if they still intend to ordain, and if they seem to be able to fit in quite well with that lifestyle, then there is the possibility for them to take the novice ordination, which is basically taking the 10 precepts, but of course becoming a novice is more like joining the Sangha, so it's a proper ordination and they get robes, and they remain as a novice for another year. It's after the end of that 2nd year that they can, if they desire, and if they seem suitable, they can take on the bhikkhu ordination. That they can, if they desire, and if they seem suitable, they can take on the bhikkhu ordination. But usually when they take on the bhikkhu ordination, it's more, they have to at least have the intention to stay for a 5-year period. Now that doesn't mean that they have to stay with me or at that monastery, but they are to stay within our tradition. If they leave this monastery, it's with the agreement of the teacher to go to another monastery of the same tradition, and that they will continue their training under the same tradition for 5 years, and that they sincerely intend to do so. Whether it happens or not remains to be seen, but at least they intend to do so. And so that is the general procedures that we've been following over the last 7 years at the monastery. I must confess that it is very hard to get people to ordain as monks. We get a lot of people coming as guests, and a lot of people intending to ordain. Some of them take the 8 precepts and stay even for a year. Very few of them take the novice ordinations, and very few take the bhikkhu ordinations. Very, very few. Of course, this is it's something that will take some time, I think. Personally, I do believe that it is probably harder to ordain, say, in Australia than to ordain in a place like Thailand, because the people or the candidate, when he comes, even if he has a good intention to ordain, the pull from the familiar, the friends, and everything is still so strong, and it's so close, so that it's easy to be pulled back, easy to be distracted. And also the monastic life is still very new there, so it's like a little outpost. It doesn't have the support, the emotional support of, say, a monastic life in a country like Thailand, where there are so many monks, so many monasteries, and everybody encourages you. Whereas being a monk in Australia is, you're just like a fish out of water sometimes, because you're just in this little outpost, and it requires a lot more strength from the monks. And it's just a little group of monks. It's surrounded by lay people, so it is quite difficult for them, I think. But over the last 7 years, we have ordained 4 monks, and they're all still monks and seem to be doing very well. We've also ordained quite a number of other people who have not ordained as monks. In other words, they've ordained as anagarikas and novices and then decided to leave. That's happened a lot, majority actually. Well, with regards nuns, you see, the Buddha did establish the bhikkhu order as well as the bhikkhuni order. But over the centuries, the bhikkhuni order in the Theravada tradition became extinct. And so for many centuries now, there hasn't been bhikkhunis in the Theravada tradition, but there have always been women who want to live the holy life or monastic life. And so in every country there's been some sort of compromise found. In Thailand they have the machi, the nuns wear white and they keep the 8 precepts. It's not a very good setup. In Sri Lanka they also have 8 precept nuns, but also 10 precept nuns. So there's always been some sort of nuns, even in the Theravada tradition, but not bhikkhunis. And so when our monks, our tradition moved to the West, Western countries such as England, naturally, eventually there'd be some women who would like to live the monastic life, and so some form of monastic life had to be developed for women, Western women. Now the Thai tradition, for the bhikkhus, our training, the bhikkhu is quite easy, it's quite strong and it's quite applicable in the West. But the Thai monastic form that they have for women is not very, it's not very developed, and it's not very suitable for Western people because it's so. The role of women in Thailand in the monasteries is very subordinate and very unfair, and there isn't much opportunity for women in Thailand in the monastic order. I'm not talking about business or social things, it's just in monastery, because they don't really get the opportunities to practice as much, nor the opportunity to receive teaching, nor the opportunity for support, material support. They more or less have to support themselves. So when we started to establish something in England and also in Australia, the idea was to try and modify or improve this somewhat. But of course we don't want to break from the tradition, from the Theravada tradition. It has to be something acceptable to the Sangha. So the compromise that was found in England was that to have for nuns or women a similar sort of training where they would become anagarikas for 2 years, that is, keep the 8 precepts for 2 years, and after that they could take a higher ordination. And the higher ordination would not be the bhikkhuni ordination, because you can't do that, but it would be something based on the bhikkhuni training. And these nuns were called Siladhara, the Siladharas. They formally take 10 precepts, but above that there's a whole training, the system of training, which is based on the bhikkhuni life, the bhikkhuni discipline. So in England we have quite a lot now, I think 15 Siladharas, in other words these nuns who wear a brown colour robe and keep these 10 precepts as well as all the other trainings. So although they are not bhikkhunis, they are not samaneris, but they are something of a higher ordination than just the 8 precept nun. And so to distinguish them, they wear brown and the 8 precept nuns wear white. It seems to be it's working quite well. There's a lot of women wanting to ordain, and they seem to be developing quite well. Some of them have been ordained for 10 years now, so they're starting to teach. And hopefully it'll develop into a good monastic order. The important thing has always been to provide equality, but not equality in that they should be exactly the same as the monks, but equality in that they should receive opportunity to ordain. They should receive the 4 requisites, just like monks do. They should be supported once they ordain. They should be given teachings. They should receive teachings like the monks receive, and they should be given the opportunity to practice the teachings, just like the monks have the opportunity. once there's this much, I think it's good. It's a good standard. And I would think that is equal enough. I mean, we can't make everything equal, that everybody does exactly the same thing. That's impossible. Even within the bhikkhu order, that's not equal. And so equal doesn't mean everybody has to be exactly the same, but more like the opportunities and the respect and the support must be there for them. So that's what we're trying to do, and we call them nuns or siladhara or 10 precept nuns or different names, but they're not bhikkhunis, although their training is based on that of the bhikkhuni. Well, like a monk is called a bhikkhu, so bhikkhuni is just a female form. So you like monk and nun, but a nun, see, this word nun is not exactly the same, because bhikkhu and bhikkhuni is the same level of ordination, really. So it would be...
But they're having 10 precepts, not 300 overrules of Siddhartha.
Yes, they only have 10 precepts, but they have many training rules which are based on those rules of the bhikkhunis. But they are not bhikkhuni. These nuns in England are not bhikkhunis. No, they're not Machi. There's something in between. Yes, 10 precept nuns. So then we just call them siladhara, just because they're not Machi and they're not bhikkhunis, but there's something, you can't ordain bhikkhuni. But in English, nun just means a woman who's devoting her life to the spiritual, monastic, religious life. So a Machi is a nun as well. Well, I would think that the training of the nuns in England, in terms of discipline and renunciation, would probably be as good. It's at that standard of a bhikkhuni training, and certainly probably better than the Mahayana, because the Mahayana, they don't stress the Vinaya very much, usually. So they may say 300 and whatever rules, but they don't keep those rules, basically. And the bhikkhus don't, and I expect the bhikkhunis don't either. I mean, the bhikkhu's supposed to have 227, but they don't keep those rules, so what's the point of having the... Yes, she's a bhikkhuni. She's a proper bhikkhuni. Mahayana tradition. So she would be, you see, this is the problem, because she's just one individual, her own. But we couldn't do that because we have a relationship with the Sangha, and it's important to us that what we do does not split the Sangha. But she, as an individual, independent person, chooses, and what she does, it's only it affects her alone. It doesn't affect anyone else. It affects her. The Sangha is not concerned. But then the Theravada Sangha, whether they accept her as a bhikkhuni or not, I don't know. She's got Mahayana ordination. And this does not detract from her. I mean, one certainly can respect her ordination and respect her teaching and all her efforts. It's fine. It's just that within the Theravada tradition, it's still a debatable point with regards bhikkhunis. So that we ourselves are not prepared to ordain nuns as bhikkhunis, because it would create a split in the Sangha. And for us, Sangha is a very important thing. We're not just a bunch of individual monks, each one doing our own thing. I want to go here, I'll just go, I'll do it this way. For us, in our tradition, Ajahn Chah's disciples in particular, Sangha is of crucial importance. And only when there is consensus within the Sangha and harmony within the Sangha should something be done. If it's going to create a split in the Sangha, it's better not to do it. So with bhikkhuni ordination, it would definitely create a split within the Sangha, within Thailand anyway. So we wouldn't do it. Well, that's what happens when the Sangha becomes weak, because there's no one with authority, and monks just do what they want. not responsible to anybody else. They just do what they want. And there's a lot of malpractice or bad forms of practice, unskillful use of the robes and the bowls found everywhere, in every country you'll find this. Certainly Thailand is not free of this. That's just one of the things that you mention, is monks collecting money under whatever pretexts. But there's much worse things than that even happen in Thailand. This is, yes, it's bad, and it certainly detracts from the Buddha Dhamma. It makes people lose faith when they see monks doing bad things. But then I think it is important also not to take it out of context. When you've got a lot of monks, there's bound to be some who are not very good, and there's bound to be some who are very good. So there's also a lot of good monks and a lot of good monasteries, a lot of good teachers. But there's also a lot who are not so good, and some who are even corrupt. I mean, there are some corrupt monks. You hear some terrible things happen. But that's a small minority, I think. The majority of monks are just ordinary. And then they're very good and they're very bad. The majority are just ordinary monks. So I think it is the responsibility of the lay people to not just give support to everyone, but to be wise and to be able to assess what is right conduct, what is wrong conduct, what should be supported, what should not be supported. If monks are involved in wrong conduct, wrong livelihood, then I think it would be proper for the lay people not to support them. In actual fact, that is the way to help the sasana, is not to support the wrong modes of conduct by monks. And this is up to the individual to notice and to take appropriate action. As to what the Sangha can do, one would think that if it's really bad action, the Sangha should be able to do something about it. In Thailand, they actually have civil laws that if a monk does something repeatedly bad, and it does it repeatedly, then it is possible for the Sangha to ask the civil authorities to apprehend and remove that monk. And they do. But once the things become the standard and common way of behavior, then everybody's doing it, like handling money. Nearly every monk handles money, so it becomes normal, even though the Buddha made it absolutely clear that monks are not to possess money, not to handle money, not to accept money, not to have complete control over money. And this is very clear in the teachings of the Buddha, but it's become common. So what can the Sangha do? Nearly everybody in the Sangha does it, so it's ordinary now and nothing can be done. But some of the other things is like actually exploiting lay people, deceiving them, and just to get money, and a lot of other superstition that's encouraged, and rites and rituals just to get money from people. Obviously this is a corruption. It's a corruption of the Sangha, it's a corruption of the sasana. And if something can be done to relieve it or to remove it, I think would be good. And the way to remove it is that there are some good monks who will try to educate people as to what is proper, and then the people will also not support those monks who are behaving improperly. No, well, there are members of the Sangha in Malaysia, but there is no official national body that acts as a registrar of monks or takes responsibility for monks or controls them. So there is no central control. Monks come and go, they're independent. Maybe they are loosely affiliated with some monastery, but usually they can come and go and do what they want, and there's no control at all. And this is why there are probably a lot of maybe it is possible for things which are not very good to happen here, It's also a wealthy country. Like Chinese people are quite wealthy and they're extremely generous. They're continually giving monks money. I would like to see that stop completely myself. If you stop that, then you won't get so many, not so many of the bad things will happen, because it's a wealthy place to come. You come to KL, you get a visa for a few months, you go back with a whole stash of money. It's very, very profitable to come to a rich country where people continually give you money. I just notice it the few days I've been here, wherever I go. people are always putting money in front of you, and I feel quite embarrassed. But in my mind, that's not for me. I don't have any personal funds. I just consider that's a donation for the monastery, and lay people look after it. But I could see how that more or less encourages monks to come here in order to get money, because people are so generous and they give money to monks, so then they want to come here. And because then Chinese people are also, or a lot of them, not every one of them, but a lot of them are very superstitious, and there's a lot of interest in fortune telling and all of this. And so a lot of monks come and start doing that, like telling fortunes and all sorts of lucky charms and blessings and all sorts of things, which obviously in Buddhism we consider wrong livelihood for a monk to do that. But this, you see, this even happened in the time of the Buddha. Monks would do things like that. And even though the Buddha said you shouldn't, it's always been around, and it's just one of the malpractices. The only way is for the Sangha to be better educated and to have monks who do practice a little better, and for them to be an example and encourage lay people as well, so that it is possible for the Sangha to become purer. But this is the way the world is. It goes up and down. The Sangha sort of, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. I know that in Thailand, personally, I can say that there's been a marked improvement over the last 15 to 20 years that I've known Thailand. I think there's been a marked improvement in both the standard of teaching of Dhamma and the standard of conduct of the monks, for many reasons. One of the reasons is that the standard of education of the lay people has become higher, and they're not so willing to accept what monks say. So there's a lot more questioning and challenging. And two, that there's more competition between different groups of monks. Like there's been a few new sects with quite radical ideas, which stimulates more interest, and then people start questioning, and monks really have to start shaping up in order to keep their support. So with the arising of people like Bodhirak from Santiyasok, his sect, and then from Dhammakaya, and the popularization of the forest tradition, so that people see these stricter forms and they flock to them. Then the village temples and the city temples, they want to retain their support, so they start improving their standard of teaching and their standard of conduct as well. So I think in the Sangha of Thailand, personally, I believe there has been an improvement over the last 15 years. But it just goes up and down. Things improve and then they degenerate. But you never get it all. Yes, well, you see, that one of the problems with that is, what I'm experiencing myself, is that usually when a visiting monk comes, you're a guest. And when you're a guest, you don't want to embarrass your hosts. In other words, you've been invited, and usually you're staying with other monks and other monasteries. So sometimes you can't say anything because you're a guest. It would be too embarrassing for the hosts, the other monks living there. And so that puts one in a difficult situation. When I'm in my own monastery, or the way I set things up in Perth is very different. I mean, I just, that my duty is to train people, so I train them according to what I think is a good standard. But when I'm a guest somewhere, it's just a lot more difficult to say anything, because it would not be very, well, it wouldn't be very polite, I don't think, embarrassing your hosts. Well, this is a definite problem. Yes, if the monk, the monk should refuse money. But if you're sitting with another monk, and you're sitting there, and if it is the host, and you say, no, I don't accept money, then you embarrass the other monk, you see. It's just, well, I can't do it because it would be too cruel. I wouldn't want to do it like that. So I ignore the whole thing myself. I don't have anything to do with it. I don't accept money, but I don't make a show of it, and I don't want to embarrass anyone, because I'll be gone in 10 days, so that these monks have to live here, and I don't want to make life difficult for them or humiliate them in any way. And that's very common. I mean, all the monks, even in Thailand, they do. It's just acceptable now. Yes, they don't. The Dhammayutta are a stricter sect, but they don't. There's all degrees of it. Each sect does it slightly differently. But yes, I don't encourage people to. If I was in a position, when I am in a position to train people, then I wouldn't encourage it to do it like that. I would give a donation to the Buddhist Society, or give a donation to the monastery for building the monastery, fine. And the important thing is to train your monks, so that no monk who lives with me has any money. That's just finished. So no monk has any money, nor does any monk have a personal fund. So it's not just not having money, it means not having your fund of money with my disciple. This is my disciple, he's got my money. That's just as bad as far as I'm concerned. The Sangha should be like, as far as the way I like the Sangha to be and the monks to be, is that they don't have any personal funds. If I need something, I ask the Sangha. If any member needs something, they request it from the Sangha. We can mention it to the lay supporters. If there are funds, they can make them available to get those things. But that's how you can do that within your own system when you're setting up and training people, or when you're just independent. In the sense of, when I'm a guest at a monastery, it's a different matter. It would be improper, I think. In terms of practicing or ordaining, obviously the scope is much greater in a country like Thailand, where the Sangha is much stronger. Yes, the Sangha in Malaysia is still very fragmented, and just bits and pieces, different bits and pieces all over the place. It would be very difficult for somebody to want to ordain here, I think. It's just different bits and pieces. And the Sangha is very weak. So, in terms of ordaining, probably would be better to go to another place, until such time as eventually the Sangha may become stronger.
Dhanasīlissa niccang addhāpacāyino cattaro dhammā vaddhanti āyuvanno Abhivādana sīlissa niccang addhāpacāyino cattaro dhammā vaddhanti āyuvanno Abhivādana sīlissa niccang addhāpacāyino cattaro dhammā Ayuvanno sukhang balang ayurārogya sampatti sagga sampatti ato nibbāna sampatti minate samijjatu.